The morning fog rolled across the Golden Gate Bridge like a silk curtain, but Delilah Morrison barely noticed the breathtaking view from her penthouse windows. At 28, 7 months pregnant with twins, she stood in her marble bathroom, staring at a credit card statement that made her blood run cold. 3 charges to the same luxury hotel in Carmel, each one coinciding perfectly with her husband's supposed investor meetings. Delilah's reflection stared back from the gilt mirror, auburn hair pulled into a messy bun, emerald eyes rimmed with exhaustion, her designer maternity dress doing little to hide her trembling hands. She was the wife of Julian Morrison, the 34-year-old wunderkind who'd built quantum dynamics from a Stanford dorm room into a billion-dollar artificial intelligence empire. Their wedding had graced the cover of Forbes, their love story the stuff of Silicon Valley legend. But legends, she was discovering, were often built on lies. The first red flag had appeared 3 months ago. Julian's phone, once carelessly left, on counters and nightstands, now never left his side. He'd started working late more frequently, returning home with the faint scent of expensive perfume that wasn't hers. When she'd mentioned it, he'd laughed it off. "You know how these tech conferences are, babe. Everyone's wearing something different." Then came the secretive phone calls, hushed conversations that ended abruptly when she entered rooms. Julian would claim they were about the upcoming IPO, about investors who demanded absolute discretion. She'd wanted to believe him. The public offering of quantum dynamics was the culmination of everything they'd worked for. But wives of tech moguls learned to read between the lines of encrypted messages and closed-door meetings. Delilah had built her own successful fashion design business before pregnancy complications forced her to step back. She wasn't naive about the world of powerful men and their appetites. The breaking point came yesterday. Julian's laptop had been left open on his desk, something that never happened with his obsession for digital security. The screen showed an encrypted messaging app she didn't recognize. As she moved to close it, a notification popped up. "Can't wait for our weekend in Carmel. The Bernardus Lodge knows how to treat VIPs. N." Her heart had hammered against her ribs. The Bernardus Lodge. The same hotel from the credit card statements. That evening, she'd played the role of devoted wife perfectly. She'd massaged Julian's shoulders while he worked, brought him his favorite scotch, listened attentively as he explained another crucial investor dinner that would keep him away for the weekend. The timing couldn't be worse, he'd said, his hand resting on her swollen belly. "But Henderson from Pacific Ventures is flying in from Tokyo. This deal could secure our Series C funding before the IPO. She'd smiled and kissed his forehead. "Of course, darling. The babies and I will be fine. Maybe I'll visit Regina." The mention of her estranged sister had made him relax visibly. Julian had never approved of Regina, the corporate lawyer who'd questioned his business practices from day one. If Delilah was planning to see Regina, she wouldn't be paying attention to his activities. Now, alone in their penthouse fortress 40 stories above the city, Delilah felt a strange calm descend. The hurt was still there, a raw, aching wound, where her trust used to be. But beneath the pain, something else was crystallizing, something harder and more dangerous than grief. She walked to Julian's home office, her bare feet silent on the Italian marble floors. His desk was pristine as always, but she knew his habits. The man who could encrypt government-level security systems still wrote backup passwords on Post-it notes. She found what she was looking for taped under his desk drawer, a string of numbers and letters that unlocked his personal cloud storage. Her fingers hesitated over his laptop keyboard. This was a line she couldn't uncross. Then she thought of her unborn children, 2 innocent souls whose futures were tied to a man who was already building a life without them. She typed in the password. The files that loaded made her sink into his leather chair, bank statements showing wire transfers to offshore accounts, architectural plans for a house in the Maldives she'd never heard of, and photos. So many photos of Julian, with a stunning brunette who looked nothing like the investors' wives he claimed to hug so familiarly. Delilah scrolled through image after image, intimate dinners, weekend getaways, stolen kisses in private jets. The Bassa woman was beautiful in a sharp, predatory way that made Delilah's soft femininity feel foolish by comparison, but it was the final folder that made her hands shake with more than betrayal. It was labeled Quantum Transfer Protocols, proprietary code that formed the backbone of their company's revolutionary AI technology. And according to the timestamps, someone had been copying these files for months. This wasn't just an affair. This was corporate espionage on a scale that could destroy everything Julian had built, everything they had built together. Delilah closed the laptop and walked back to the window. The fog was lifting, revealing the city sprawled below like a circuit board. Somewhere, Marcus Chen's fingers danced across 3 monitors in his downtown San Francisco office, each screen displaying cascading lines of code and financial data. At 35, the former FBI cybercrime specialist had traded his government badge for the more lucrative world of private investigation, specializing in cases where digital forensics met human deception. The call from Delilah Morrison had come at 3 a.m. Her voice was steady, controlled, but Marcus had heard that tone before, the forced calm of someone standing on the edge of an abyss. She'd hired him with a single instruction. I need to know everything about my husband's digital life. Everything. Now, 72 hours later, Marcus was staring at a web of financial transactions that made his blood run cold. Julian Morrison wasn't just having an affair, he was systematically looting his own company. Jesus, Marcus muttered, highlighting another suspicious cryptocurrency transfer. His office, a converted warehouse space filled with servers and surveillance equipment, hummed with the constant whir of cooling fans. The walls were lined with monitors showing real-time data feeds from around the world. His investigation had started simply enough. Phone records, credit card statements, the usual digital breadcrumbs left by cheating spouses. But Julian Morrison was smarter than most. He'd used encrypted communications, burner phones, and cryptocurrency wallets to hide his tracks. Almost hide them. Marcus had spent 15 years with the Bureau tracking money laundering operations and cybercriminals. He knew that everyone left a digital signature, no matter how clever they thought they were. Julian's signature was written in blockchain transactions and shell company formations. The breakthrough had come when Marcus identified the mysterious N from Delilah's evidence. Natasha Volkov, 32, originally from Prague, but with passports from 3 different countries. Her official biography listed her as an independent art consultant specializing in Eastern European acquisitions. Her real biography was far more interesting. Marcus pulled up her file on his central monitor. Natasha had been linked to art forgery operations in Vienna, Prague, and Monaco, though she'd never been formally charged. She had a gift for appearing in the lives of wealthy men just before they experienced mysterious financial difficulties. Her last known victim, a German pharmaceutical executive, had lost 40 million euros to what authorities believed was an elaborate con involving fake Renaissance paintings. But Julian Morrison wasn't just another mark. The financial flows Marcus had uncovered suggested something far more sophisticated than a simple romance scam. She's not just stealing his money, Marcus said to his empty office, a habit he'd developed during long nights of investigation. She's stealing his company. The evidence was scattered across dozens of encrypted files and blockchain transactions, but the pattern was clear. Natasha had been using Julian to access quantum dynamics' most sensitive intellectual property. The AI algorithms that powered their revolutionary machine learning systems were being copied, encrypted, and transferred to servers in non-extradition countries. Marcus cross-referenced the timing of these transfers with Julian's travel records. Every romantic getaway coincided with a major data breach. Every intimate dinner preceded the disappearance of classified files. She was seducing him into corporate espionage without him even realizing it. The scope of the theft was staggering. If quantum dynamics proprietary code ended up in the hands of foreign competitors, it could cripple the company's upcoming IPO and destroy billions in market value. Worse, some of the stolen algorithms had potential military applications. Marcus reached for his secure phone. This case had moved beyond marital infidelity into national security territory. But first, he owed his client a warning. "Mrs. Morrison," he said when Delilah answered on the first ring, "we need to meet. Tonight. And you're going to want to sit down for this conversation." "Is it bad?" Delilah's voice was barely a whisper. Marcus stared at the screen showing millions of dollars in stolen assets and enough corporate secrets to topple governments. "It's worse than bad. Your husband isn't just cheating on you. He's been compromised by a professional operative. And if we don't act fast, she's going to disappear with enough stolen technology to build her own tech empire." There was silence on the line. Then Delilah's voice returned, harder now, filled with a determination that surprised him. "Mr. Chen, I don't care what it takes or what it costs. I want you to find every single transaction, every stolen file, every lie she's whispered in his ear. And then I want you to help me destroy her." Marcus smiled grimly. He'd worked with federal prosecutors who had less steel in their voices. "Yes, ma'am. Consider it done." The game was about to change, and Natasha Volkov had no idea that her perfect Mark had a very dangerous wife. Natasha Volkov adjusted the Hermes scarf around her neck as she walked through the pristine corridors of the Meridian Gallery in Napa Valley. At 32, she moved with the fluid grace of a dancer and the calculated precision of a chess master. Her dark hair was pulled into an elegant chignon, and her tailored Armani suit spoke of wealth and sophistication, all carefully crafted elements of an identity that existed only as long as it served her purposes. The gallery opening was the perfect cover for what would be her final meeting with Julian Morrison. Around her, Silicon Valley's elite sipped champagne and admired abstract paintings worth more than most people's homes. They had no idea they were standing in the presence of one of Europe's most wanted art forgers and corporate spies. "Darling, you look radiant," Julian whispered as he appeared beside her, his hand finding the small of her back. His touch still sent a thrill through her, not from love, but from the intoxicating rush of a perfectly executed con approaching its climax. Julian Morrison had been her most challenging and rewarding target. Unlike her previous marks, lonely billionaires, susceptible to flattery and feminine wiles, Julian was sharp, paranoid, and deeply suspicious of anyone who showed interest in his business. It had taken her 6 months to penetrate his defenses, using a carefully orchestrated chance encounter at a tech conference in Barcelona. "The Monet reproduction is exquisite," she murmured, steering him toward a painting she'd helped create, in a studio outside Prague. "Though I suspect the brushwork in the water lilies section is too precise for 1919. Julian laughed, charmed by her expertise. He had no idea that she'd spent 3 years learning to replicate impressionist techniques from a master forger who'd fooled the Louvre for decades. Every piece of knowledge she displayed, every cultural reference she dropped, was ammunition in a war he didn't know he was fighting. "I have something for you," he said, producing a small black device from his jacket pocket. "The latest quantum dynamics prototype, completely off the books." Natasha's pulse quickened as she recognized the quantum encryption module, the crown jewel of Julian's technology empire. The device contained algorithms that could revolutionize everything from cryptocurrency to national defense systems. Foreign governments would pay hundreds of millions for this technology. "Julian, I couldn't," she said, playing the role of the reluctant lover. What if someone finds out? No one will know, he assured her, pressing the device into her hands. It's a one-off prototype. Officially, it doesn't exist. She allowed her fingers to tremble slightly as she accepted the device, letting him see vulnerability where there was only cold calculation. In 3 hours, this prototype would be on a private jet to Prague, where her associates would reverse engineer every circuit and line of code. But first, she had one final performance to give. "Julian," she said, her voice dropping to a whisper. "I've been thinking about what you said, about leaving your wife after the IPO. His expression tightened slightly. They'd discussed his marriage in abstract terms, but she'd never pushed him toward any concrete decisions. That wasn't her role in this game. "Natasha, you know how complicated—" "I know," she interrupted, stepping closer. "But I've received an offer. A position in Vienna, heading up acquisitions for the Kunsthistorisches Museum. It's everything I've ever wanted professionally." The lie came as easily as breathing. There was no position in Vienna. By tomorrow morning, Natasha Volkov would cease to exist, replaced by Elena Kozlova, a successful tech entrepreneur with a suspiciously well-funded startup in Monaco. "When would you leave?" Julian asked, and she could hear the panic creeping into his voice. 2 weeks, she said, watching his face carefully. "Unless I have a reason to stay." This was the moment she'd been building toward for months. Julian Morrison was successful enough to recover from financial theft, smart enough to eventually discover the missing files, and suspicious enough to cause problems if he felt betrayed. But a man convinced that he'd lost the love of his life would be too heartbroken to think clearly. "I'll leave her," he said suddenly. "After the IPO, I'll divorce Victoria and we'll start fresh, anywhere you want." Natasha let tears gather in her eyes, glycerin drops she'd perfected years ago. "Do you mean it?" "I mean it," he said, pulling her close. "I love you, Natasha, more than I've ever loved anyone." The words should have meant nothing to her. She'd heard similar declarations from a dozen other marks, men who'd confused manipulation with affection. But something in Julian's voice gave her pause, a sincerity that was almost touching in its foolishness. For a brief moment, she allowed herself to imagine a different ending to this story. Julian was handsome, brilliant, and genuinely devoted to her constructed persona. In another life, perhaps she could have been the woman he thought he was saving. But Natasha Volkov had learned long ago that sentiment was a luxury she couldn't afford. Her childhood in Prague's orphanages had taught her that survival required constant adaptation, that trust was a weakness that got you hurt. "I love you, too," she whispered against his ear, meaning it in the only way she knew how, as a perfectly crafted lie designed to destroy him. Around them, the gallery's patrons continued their sophisticated discussions of art and culture, unaware that they were witnessing the final act of a performance that would reshape the global technology landscape. Natasha smiled and squeezed Julian's hand, already mentally preparing for her disappearance. In 72 hours, she would vanish with enough stolen technology to build an empire. She had no idea that Julian's pregnant wife was already 3 moves ahead. Regina Morrison stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of her corner office on the 42nd floor of the Transamerica building, watching the fog roll in from the Pacific. At 31, she was the youngest partner at Blackstone and Associates, the most feared corporate law firm on the West Coast. Her reputation for ruthless litigation and creative legal solutions had earned her enemies and admirers in equal measure. The call from her sister had been unexpected. She and Delilah hadn't spoken in 2 years, not since Regina had warned her against marrying Julian Morrison. Their father's funeral had been the last time they'd been in the same room, and even then, they'd maintained an icy politeness that spoke volumes about their fractured relationship. "Regina, I need your help," Delilah had said, her voice stripped of the softness Regina remembered from their childhood. "It's about Julian. And it's bigger than just an affair. Now, reviewing the files that Marcus Chen had compiled, Regina felt a familiar thrill of legal battle approaching. The evidence was damning: systematic embezzlement, corporate espionage, and enough securities fraud to put Julian away for decades. But more importantly, it was a case that could restore her relationship with her sister while destroying the man who'd driven them apart. Her secretary knocked and entered. "Ms. Morrison, Agent Patricia Diaz from the FBI is here to see you." Patricia Diaz entered the office with the confident stride of someone accustomed to being the smartest person in the room. At 45, she was a veteran of the Bureau's white-collar crime division with silver-streaked hair and sharp eyes that missed nothing. "Ms. Morrison," Agent Diaz said, settling into the leather chair across from Regina's desk, "I understand you have information about Natasha Volkov." Regina smiled thinly. She'd reached out to federal authorities not out of civic duty, but because she needed their resources for what she was planning. "Agent Diaz, what I have is better than information. I have her entire playbook." She pushed a thick folder across the desk. "Natasha Volkov has been running the same con for 8 years. The pattern is always identical. Target wealthy tech executives, seduce them into compromising positions, steal their intellectual property, then disappear before anyone notices the theft." Agent Diaz opened the folder, her eyebrows rising as she scanned the documents. "Where did you get this?" "My sister hired a very thorough private investigator," Regina said. "But the really interesting part is what we found when we started digging into her previous victims." Regina had spent the last week using her firm's international contacts to trace Natasha's history. What she'd discovered was a criminal enterprise, spanning multiple continents and involving millions in stolen assets. Klaus Bergman, pharmaceutical executive from Munich, lost $40 million in what he thought was an art investment scam, except it wasn't just about money. Natasha walked away with the formulas for 3 experimental cancer drugs. She pulled up another file on her tablet. Viktor Petrov, Russian oil executive, thought he was buying his mistress a villa in Monaco, actually financed the theft of drilling technology that ended up in Chinese hands. "And now she's targeting Julian Morrison," Agent Diaz said, understanding immediately. "Quantum dynamics is about to go public with technology that could revolutionize artificial intelligence," Regina continued. "If that technology ends up in the wrong hands, it's not just corporate espionage. It's a national security threat." Agent Diaz leaned back in her chair, processing the implications. "What do you need from us?" "Surveillance on Natasha Volkov starting immediately. And when the time comes, I need you to freeze every account she's ever accessed. But most importantly, I need you to let this play out." "Excuse me?" Regina's smile turned predatory. "Agent Diaz, you could arrest Natasha Volkov right now and charge her with multiple felonies. She'd probably get 20 years, maybe more. But she'd also disappear into the federal prison system, and you'd never recover the hundreds of millions she's stolen from her previous victims." She stood and walked to the window, gesturing toward the city below. "Or you could help me give her enough rope to hang herself. Let her think she's succeeded. Let her make one final play, and then we take down her entire network." Agent Diaz was quiet for a long moment. "What aren't you telling me, Ms. Morrison?" Regina turned back to face her. "My sister isn't just looking for justice, Agent Diaz. She wants revenge. And frankly, after what Julian has put her through, I think she deserves it." "Revenge isn't justice." "No," Regina agreed, "but sometimes it's more satisfying." She returned to her desk and pulled out another folder, this one marked with her law firm's seal. "Julian Morrison's marriage to my sister was governed by a prenuptial agreement that he insisted on. Very one-sided, very favorable to him. But prenups can be invalidated under certain circumstances, such as fraud, concealment of assets, criminal activity that financially harms the spouse." Regina's smile was arctic. "With the evidence we've gathered, that prenup isn't worth the paper it's printed on. and under California community property law, Delilah would be entitled to half of everything Julian owns, including his controlling stake in quantum dynamics. Agent Diaz whistled softly. She'd become one of the wealthiest women in Silicon Valley overnight. And more importantly, she'd have the power to protect her children and ensure that quantum dynamics technology doesn't end up in enemy hands. Regina checked her watch. Julian thinks he's planning a romantic weekend getaway with his mistress. He has no idea he's about to walk into the most expensive trap in corporate history. She looked at Agent Diaz, her expression serious. The question is, Agent Diaz, are you willing to help two sisters take down an international criminal network, or are you going to let Natasha Volkov disappear with enough stolen technology to destabilize global markets? Agent Diaz stood, tucking the files under her arm. Ms. Morrison, you have the full cooperation of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. But if this goes wrong— It won't, Regina interrupted. I've been planning this for longer than you think. And unlike Natasha Volkov, I don't leave anything to chance. As Agent Diaz left the office, Regina returned to the window. Somewhere, out there, her sister was preparing for the fight of her life. And for the first time in years, Regina was proud to be a Morrison. The Quantum Dream, Julian Morrison's 200-foot yacht, cut through the calm waters of San Francisco Bay like a gleaming white arrow. The vessel was hosting Quantum Dynamics' pre-IPO celebration, a carefully orchestrated event designed to generate buzz among investors and tech media. At 8 months pregnant, Delilah Morrison moved carefully across the polished deck, her emerald evening gown flowing around her like liquid silk. To the 150 guests aboard, she appeared to be the picture of grace, the supportive wife celebrating her husband's greatest triumph. None of them suspected that she was orchestrating the most elaborate corporate takedown in Silicon Valley history. Mrs. Morrison, you look absolutely radiant, gushed a tech journalist from Forbes, her camera flashing. How does it feel to see your husband's company about to go public? It's been an incredible journey, Delilah replied with a perfect smile. Julian has worked so hard for this moment. I'm just grateful to be here to share it with him. The words tasted like ash in her mouth, but she'd become an expert at performance over the past week. Every detail of tonight had been planned with military precision. Marcus Chen's surveillance team was positioned throughout the yacht, recording everything. Regina's legal team was standing by with federal warrants. Agent Diaz had FBI agents, posed as catering staff and security personnel. Delilah excused herself from the journalist and made her way to the yacht's upper deck, where Julian was holding court with potential investors. He looked magnificent in his custom tuxedo, his dark hair perfectly styled, his smile confident and charming. For a moment, she remembered why she'd fallen in love with him. Then she saw Natasha Volkov. The woman stood at Julian's side like a queen surveying her domain. She'd managed to secure an invitation as the representative of a fictional European investment firm, her forged credentials passing even Julian's paranoid security screening. She wore a stunning red dress that hugged her figure like a second skin, and every man in her vicinity was mesmerized. "Delilah, darling," Julian called out as he spotted her. "Come meet some of our European investors." She approached the group, with careful steps, her hand resting protectively on her swollen belly. "I'd be delighted." Julian made the introductions, his arm sliding around Delilah's waist in a gesture that once would have comforted her. Now it felt like a cage. "And this is Elena Kozlova from Meridian Capital Partners," he said, gesturing toward Natasha. "She's been instrumental in organizing our European expansion." "How lovely to meet you," Delilah said, extending her hand. "Elena, is it? Such an interesting name." Natasha's smile was perfect, but Delilah caught the flicker of wariness in her eyes. "The pleasure is mine, Mrs. Morrison. Your husband speaks of you constantly." "I'm sure he does," Delilah replied, her voice honey-sweet. "Tell me, how long have you been working with Julian? You seem so close." The two women regarded each other like chess masters studying the board. Around them, the party continued, but Delilah felt as though she and Natasha were locked in a bubble of mutual recognition. "About 6 months," Natasha replied carefully. "Quantum dynamics has such innovative technology. It's been fascinating to learn about your husband's algorithms." Delilah's smile sharpened. "Oh, Julian's always been generous with his knowledge. Sometimes too generous, don't you think?" Before Natasha could respond, Julian's assistant appeared at his elbow. "Mr. Morrison, there's an urgent call from the SEC, something about the IPO filing." Julian frowned. "Can't it wait? We're in the middle of—" "They said it was urgent, sir. Something about irregularities in the financial documentation." Delilah watched the color drain from her husband's face. Phase 1 was beginning. "I should take this," Julian said, already moving toward the yacht's communication center. "Elena, would you excuse me? Delilah can show you around." As soon as Julian disappeared, Natasha's demeanor shifted. The polished socialite facade cracked, revealing something harder underneath. "You know," she said quietly. "I know everything," Delilah replied. "The question is, what are you going to do about it?" Natasha glanced around the deck, calculating escape routes. "You have no idea what you're dealing with." "On the contrary," Delilah said, pulling out her phone. With a single tap, she activated an app that Marcus had installed. "I know exactly who you are, Natasha Volkov. I know about Prague, Vienna, Monaco. I know about Klaus Bergman and Viktor Petrov. And I know about the quantum encryption module you're planning to steal tonight." Natasha's eyes widened. "You can't prove anything." "Actually, I can." Delilah's phone screen displayed a live feed from the yacht's security cameras. "Smile, Natasha. You're on federal surveillance." Around them, the party atmosphere began to shift as FBI agents emerged from their positions among the catering staff. Agent Diaz appeared at the top of the stairs, her badge clearly visible. "Natasha Volkov," Agent Diaz called out, "you're under arrest for corporate espionage, wire fraud, and conspiracy to commit theft of trade secrets." Natasha looked around desperately, but there was nowhere to run. The yacht was surrounded by Coast Guard vessels, and federal agents were blocking every exit. "This isn't over," she hissed at Delilah as the handcuffs clicked into place. "Oh, but it is," Delilah replied. "And just so you know, I'm keeping the necklace Julian bought you. Consider it compensation for emotional distress." As Natasha was led away, Julian emerged from the communication center, his face ashen. He looked around at the federal agents, the handcuffed woman, and finally at his wife. "Delilah, what's happening? What have you done?" She turned to face him, her hand resting on her belly where their children grew. "I've protected our family, Julian, something you seem to have forgotten how to do." Regina appeared beside her, a legal document in her hand. "Julian Morrison, you're being served with divorce papers. Given the criminal charges you're about to face, I think you'll find the terms quite generous." "Criminal charges?" Julian's voice cracked. "What criminal charges?" "Embezzlement, securities fraud, conspiracy." Regina's smile was razor-sharp. "Did you really think we wouldn't find the offshore accounts, the stolen technology transfers, the shell companies?" As federal agents moved to arrest her husband, Delilah felt a strange sense of peace. The game was over, and she had won more than just revenge. She had secured her children's future and protected technology that could change the world. "Mrs. Morrison," Agent Diaz approached her, "the Bureau wants to thank you for your cooperation. Your evidence will help us dismantle an international criminal network." Delilah nodded, watching as Julian was led away in handcuffs. "Agent Diaz, what happens to quantum dynamics now?" "Well," Regina said, joining the conversation. According to the emergency board meeting that convened an hour ago, the company needs new leadership, someone with a clean reputation and a vision for ethical technology development. Delilah looked out over the water, where the lights of San Francisco glittered like stars. Tomorrow, she would become the CEO of a billion-dollar company. But tonight she was simply a woman who had learned that sometimes the only way to protect what you love is to be willing to destroy what threatens it. The fog was rolling in from the Pacific, and somewhere in its depths, the future was waiting.